So one of the later questions I was going to ask anyway is kind of on this exact topic when we're talking about travelers versus tourists. And there's a lot of discourse online about how one is different from another, which I personally like. I don't see that at all. I think it's very elitist. I think it breeds like dissent. And yeah, what's your opinion on that as well?
I don't like the labeling of people, particularly when there's a derogatory association to one of those terms.
Yeah.
There's generally this people. A lot of people say that tourists are not, being a tourist is bad and being a traveler is good, basically. And first thing, factually, it's incorrect because the definition of tourist is traveling for leisure, according to the dictionary. So therefore, we're all tourists,
Yeah.
no matter how we travel. And it is true, there's different ways of travel have a better or worse impact. And I definitely think it is important to discuss uh, better ways of traveling so that we're having a positive impact on the destinations we're visiting. But I don't think we need to label that as a particular type of traveler because within every cross section of travelers, whether it's people cruising, luxury, budget, backpacking, whatever it is, there's good ways of doing it and there's not so good ways of doing it. And I think that's where the focus should be, not on calling people out for not being the same as us, which is basically what those people are generally doing. Is like, I'm this type of traveler and I'm the best type of traveler and you're that type of traveler and you're not as good as me.
Yeah.
And when you say it like that, you can relate that to so many things in life which are not good and don't have good consequences. So I don't think labels are positive.
I just don't think they're helpful. Like, and it
No.
is so often, as you say, done with this sort of attitude of like even if it's not explicitly said, if you're saying, well, I'm a traveler and you're a tourist, like know that that's how we all hear that in our
Yeah.
head. Like it's
Yeah.
not appropriate to say like I'm this and you're that, and that's fine, but I am this. Like,
Yeah.
no, you're not. You're still if you don't see yourself as a visitor, that can be problematic in its own
Yeah.
way. Like you're not local and you need to still behave as such and like try and understand the culture from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation recently. Well, I tried to have a conversation recently on Instagram. Somebody had done a post specifically about this topic,
Mm.
and I had commented to say that I feel I'm a tourist, even though the term tourist was being used derogatory within this person's post.
Yeah.
But I still travel in the ways that they'd said were all the good ways, but that I'm a tourist. And they wouldn't even engage with me on a conversation. They just replied to say, we're just going to have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And I was like, you can't put these statements out on social media and then not have the conversations about it either. And I think that's what I love about the travel community on Instagram
Mm.
is that there are so many great conversations that happen regardless of whether I agree or disagree with a lot of the things. We have conversations, and as a result of those, it's changed my way of thinking, or it's opened my mind, or
Same.
and that's really what we should be doing.
Yeah, I enjoy having my worldview challenged because it makes me better. Like if I can see
Yeah,
another perspective, then I can consider it when I'm
yeah,
writing my next post or thinking about the
yeah,
next place I go. Um, so this is all a good kind of intro to it. But when we're thinking about all these different ways that people travel, I don't believe, and I hope you don't either, that like it needs to be inherently unsustainable. Like I've had conversations before where people have said things like, well, unfortunately, like travel is just quite unsustainable. And even though I choose to do it, that's kind of like the piece I make is that I'm going to be a little bit unsustainable. And I really don't like this. So, what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
um, it's a very interesting point of view because on one hand I agree that it doesn't have to be inherently unsustainable, and that there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that the type of travel has a positive impact. But there's one element that I really struggle with, which is flying. And I now have the joy of time, which means that I can take less flights and stay longer in a destination and travel overland a lot more. But I don't have enough luxury of time that when I want to go to Tanzania, I can, get a train and all the rest. I still have to fly, and I believe that there is, it is to a degree, but a world without flights is also not a world that I think any of us would want to live in unless we want to strip ourselves all the way back to 300-400 years ago, or maybe longer. My history timetables are not very good, but I definitely think that overall travel doesn't have to be a negative. It should be a power for good, so long as it is done by the powers that be. I don't think it can be tourist led. If it's tourist led, there will be small changes, but there won't be the mass changes that is required. At the end of the day, if, say, for example, there was a ban on going to country, so going to any hotel that isn't giving at least X% to local communities, all of the travel companies would instantly change the hotels that they work with and work with the right companies. But because that doesn't exist, they will go with the ones that is going to provide them the most profit. But ultimately, tourism is a business.
Do you think there's something to be said for the change starting with the tourists? So the tourists asking for that change?
Yeah, I think with most things, there has to be a voice that is requesting change, and when people start voting with their money, then companies start to listen. If we look at veganism as an example, and we go back 10 years, a lot of restaurants probably didn't see the need to offer a vegan option on their menu, because, well, those few, they can go somewhere else. Whereas when there's enough vegans now that if they don't offer a good selection of vegan dishes, they miss out on a particular cross section of customers, but also it has a negative impact on how they are viewed by others as well, even if they're not vegan. That's just one example. So it does have to start somewhere, and that noise will always, I think, start with the consumer. But for the bigger changes to happen, there has to be policy changes, I think.
Yeah. I think you cut out a tiny bit when you were talking about flight.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think you were saying that you see them as like completely and inherently unsustainable. Is that correct?
I feel that I don't know at this stage how you can make flying sustainable.
Yeah.
And I know there's biofuels and there's lots of different processes that are being put in place, but I don't see how flying can ever be sustainable.
Yeah.
But I also don't see a world. I don't think not flying is sustainable either, because
Yeah.
a world with no flights is, we wouldn't have goods. We would be reliant. So in the UK, we would be fully reliant on either imports by sea, which is not necessarily that much greener either. Unless we go back to agrarian societies where none of us travel and none of us change clothes, and we only eat what we produce in our own backyard, and we reduce the population significantly, and all of that is not realistic. So is that
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
It's true. I think something that really helps me with this topic, because I agree at the moment flying is not sustainable, and there's no point arguing with that. There's a couple of things though. Firstly, not every trip has to involve flying, I think, at least. And the second thing is that when it comes to flying, we think of it as this huge, like, well, flying is awful for the environment, like there's just no way around that. And that is true, but in terms of statistics, so flying actually doesn't account for that much of the world's kind of carbon footprint. And it sounds ridiculous because it's like, well, yeah, it does, like it's flying. Actually, it's something very small, like only 2.5%.
Yeah.
And when you look at factors like sectors like agriculture, they're actually accounting for a huge amount more, like it's something like 11, 12%. I'll have to
Yeah.
check those statistics, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. And when you look at it that way, I'm not by any means saying don't worry about it, fly as much as you want. But what I'm saying is it doesn't need to be an excuse for us to say, well, travel's just not sustainable, so
Yeah.
I'm going to do whatever I like.
No, I agree with that. And because you also need to look, I think with everything, you need to look at the positives and the negatives.
Yeah.
And being able to move people around the world in a convenient and fast way, that has a huge amount of positives. And there's so many countries that rely heavily on tourism for their income.
Um,
Um, and they wouldn't have that if people couldn't fly there.
yeah.
For me, it's things like I put my hands up. I bought a ticket. It was £14 return to go to Gdansk for a weekend for the
Yeah.
Christmas markets, and
That is
that to me is
value.
where, yeah, it's just that shouldn't be like that. That's basically all I paid for the taxes. I'm assuming. I even think the taxes are more than £14, so I'm not quite sure. Um, and what I find frustrating is that aviation is heavily subsidized,
Mhm.
but yet train travel, I don't know if it's subsidized or not, but based on how much you pay to use the trains, and the challenges that there are with timetables, and obviously flights are delayed and everything as well.
Mhm.
Like I would want to see a lot more being plowed into train travel
Mhm.
and making that as affordable as possible, as opposed to subsidizing air tickets.
Was it Ryanair out of interest?
Wizz Air.
Was that because with Ryanair, I don't know if it is the same with Wizz Air, but I know that Ryanair sell off a bunch of seats at like extremely low prices, like for popular routes. So there's one, I think it might be Warsaw to Gdansk or Gdansk to Wrocław, and it's like £2.99 to get that flight. And they sell it like basically at a loss so that they continue and like perpetuate this reputation of being very cheap, very affordable. And then they'll put like their other fares up so they make like either a real break even or they, make a profit. And as you say, it shouldn't be that way. Like the fact that they are doing that is obviously because they have a lot of money. People have paid into them as affordable flying. And train companies can't do that. Like they don't have that capacity.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I think that's where if we genuinely care about sustainable travel, and when I talk about that, I mean about the getting from A to B, is I think there needs to be more support to make it possible.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I think as humans, inherently, we are always going to pick the more affordable, most convenient option.
Yeah.
If it had cost 14.99 to get a train to Gdansk, I probably wouldn't have gone,
Mm.
because it would have taken, I don't know, three days each way to go, and I wouldn't have had enough holiday to do that. But because it was a flight and it meant I could, fly on a Friday and come back on a Sunday, I did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. There's those two things always competing, like cost versus convenience. And when they sort of gel together, it's like a no-brainer. And obviously
Yeah,
people are going to choose that.
yeah,
Um, so when we're talking about nuance, because you and I do, especially you, I think, like look at things from a very nuanced perspective, we don't really have the means to give people these like hard and fast like tips or here's 10 ways to do something. And it's something I really struggle with when people are like, well, how can I be a more sustainable traveler? Because it really varies, like depending on your circumstances, the destination, etc. What do you think, like do you think there are ways that we can do that, or do you think it really just depends on the individual destination?
I think it definitely depends on the destination and the type of travel. But my entire focus on sustainable tourism is actually on making sure that the money you spend is stays within the community that you're visiting.
Mhm.
And I think that even though it's nuanced and even though there's lots of elements to it, I think there are some hard, fast ways that you can make sure that you're having a positive impact. And that for me is to explore beyond the highlights. So many people will visit somewhere because they want to see the highlight. And why would it? You would go to Rome, you would obviously want to see the Colosseum. Why would you not? But don't stop there. Don't stop there and at the Trevi Fountain. Go and explore the neighborhoods. Go and join a tour that is run by a local guide who is going to explain the history, who's going to take you to loads of little family run restaurants to try the food. And I think there's lots of things that we can do to make sure that the money that we're spending in a location is staying in that location. Booking local hotels, eating in local restaurants, using local guides. And that for me, that is probably the thing I'm most passionate about. Is yes, just thinking about the impact you have on that community, and also making sure it's a positive impact, that they enjoy you being there,
Yeah.
that you don't leave your rubbish behind, that you treat them as they want to be treated, not as you want to be treated, that you adapt to their culture. Just because we've gone somewhere hot doesn't mean we have the right to walk around completely uncovered if in that culture that is just not what the locals do. And even if they're tolerant of it, because a lot of places have become tolerant, it doesn't mean that they would do it. And I always feel, do what they would do, not what they're okay with you doing. I might be okay with somebody coming to my house and not taking their shoes off because I don't want to say anything. But if all of us take our shoes off, I would prefer them to notice and take their shoes off. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. With the clothing, something that really like kind of smacked me in the face, that like I am very careful about what clothing I wear anyway, and I always would try and dress respectfully. But when we were in Socotra, the guide was saying to us, I mean, because the hospitality there is just like next level. And he was saying, we really want you to be comfortable. Like if you're comfortable wearing like these clothes, it's fine, it's not a problem. And I was very fortunate that the company that had taken us out there also had an American woman who had married into a Socotra family as like one of the sort of leaders of this tour company. And she was like, they do say that, and they really mean it, and they want you to be comfortable. But what I think is when you see children running around in the street, the children are looking at you in those clothes, and that's gonna like change their mind. Like they might not understand what they're seeing, but as they grow up with that, like it will become an ingrained part of their society. So you could be changing their culture, and that's just wrong, I think.
Yeah. And I think if anybody's ever going to make a joke of, round, like I always think about it is, no, you do whatever you want, you do whatever you want. And then when you leave, they're sitting down having dinner and going, oh my God, did you see like her bum was hanging out or whatever? You don't want to be that, even though they were happy for you to do it. If they then are going to talk about it afterwards, it means it wasn't ever okay.
Yeah.
And it might be the people that work within tourism are happy because you're bringing them the money, but the people that are not benefiting from tourism might not be happy. And so I always try and look at what are the locals wearing, and I will dress as closely to that as I can. Not that I flaunt anything in any country, but that has less to do with the country I'm in and more about how I feel about myself. But it just like I just think if you're in a culture and they eat with their right hand without knives and forks, I will try and eat with my right hand without knives and forks. It's adapting, and it's part of the travel experience, and it's part of what I can then take home and the stories that then I can tell, and that's what travel's about. For me. But of course, my way isn't the best way, isn't the right way. And that's what we were saying earlier, that every way of travel is, we have to embrace all of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said there about certain things like eating with your right hand and stuff, like to the unassuming tourist, right? That might just be like an odd quirk that that country has. But in that country, it might be that if you eat with a knife and fork, you're being like horrendously rude and not like embracing it.
Yeah,
Or if you eat with
yeah,
your left hand, we all know what that means. Like, it's kind of one
yeah,
of those things where it's like you might not understand the nuance of what you're doing, but you could be being offensive. There's any number of ways. And I think for me, one of the hard and fast rules is like ask questions. Firstly, like ask questions of everybody that you meet and don't just take the first person's answer, like verify it, like check with so many people. And then the second thing is just go in with an open mind and be like considerate of what you're told. And if you're told, do this, don't be like, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. Like, do it.
yeah. And I think you make a really good point about ask many people, because again, there's this assumption that you go to a country and everybody thinks the same, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
Like within every, if you that'd be as ridiculous as saying to somebody who comes to the UK that we all think exactly the same way, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And that is the same everywhere. I live in Spain now, and Spain is such a regionalized country. If you come to the Basque Country and behave in the same way that you do in Andalusia, in the south, like you're just not going to integrate, and you're going to have a really challenging time. Culturally, the different languages different, but even within the Basque Country, there's people that vote for this party or that party who Catholic or atheist. So there's so many. So you just have to, like you say, you have to ask questions
Mm.
of everybody and adapt to the people that you're with as well.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is when I see like bloggers or people on social media saying, and I spoke to the locals and the locals think this. And it's like, what? Like, not everybody like think no one's a monolith. Like they're not all sitting there thinking that and waving little flags about it. Like it doesn't work that way.
No, exactly.
Um, so when we talk about sustainable travel, you've kind of said that your main thing is trying to invest into local economies. And I think that's great to like pick a specific area and sort of focus on that. Is that what sustainable travel means to you then?
Yeah, I see sustainable travel as the much bigger, um I don't know what the word to use. It is such a huge thing, because it's the how you get from A to B. It's the impact you have on the communities, and I feel that is too overwhelming for me to think about all of it.
Yeah.
And I've honed in on sustainable travel being specifically about having a positive impact on the places that I visit. Um, and that can be places that very few people ever visit. It could be really popular places, but it's making sure that the money that I'm spending is having a positive impact on the locals of that community. And that to me is really important, because I think so much of unsustainable tourism comes from practices where the locals don't benefit
Yeah.
from people visiting, whether it's they don't benefit economically or culturally or physically, or lots of different ways. And so that is what I kind of talk about, and it's what I try and live by in the ways that I travel.
Love that. It's a big focus of mine too, actually. Like I think for me it's like the people and the animals. Like I want to make sure
Yeah,
that the actual individuals are kind of profiting. I care about ecosystems and that kind of thing as well. But for me, like if there's an individual that's impacted, that's so
yeah,
important.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was all the questions that I had. Unless you have anything else you want to add to this very interesting topic.
No, well, I wanted to add a nuance. As you know, I recently went to Bali, which is not somewhere was on my bucket list, but I got the opportunity to go, and I went, and I spent 7 days poorly. But on the 3 days that I did have to explore, um, one belief I've always had is you have to stay in local hotels. And my travel to Bali showed me that, again, having a fixated thought isn't always a good thing. I discovered this amazing little boutique hotel in Jimbaran in the south of Bali. And Jimbaran is predominantly resorts or homestays. But if you're wanting something comfortable, and a friend I was traveling with enjoys a little bit of luxury, it's really hard to find somewhere that is local and that. And I thought I'd found somewhere local. And it wasn't until I got there that I realized that it was owned by a Spanish man. He'd worked throughout Asia for some of the biggest chains. And then when he settled in Bali, had opened his hotel.
Mm.
And of all the places we stayed, it had by far the best staff. They were all local. They all had really good use of English. They all had a really good ability to interact with guests differently. So, with me, there was a lot of banter. With others, there was a lot of professionalism. The customer service was phenomenal. The hotel manager was a woman, and so they were encouraging their staff to also pursue additional qualifications. So one of their social media wanted to go and get a PhD in social media. So I was really wowed with them. They support. So they took us to the local market with a cook to buy fish to then cook it. They rehomed the local stray dogs, and you could leave a tip to. So there's all of these positives. And when I thought of that, I was like, I would recommend anybody go to that hotel, because I feel that even though it's an internationally owned hotel and he will be profiting from that, the good that he is creating in that community and with his staff completely outweighs the fact that he's an international owner. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, and why I am so focused on the nuances, is that if all we ever do is preach it needs to be locally owned hotel, you could miss ones that are doing really good work. And so I just wanted to finish with that.
It's good. It's so good. Like, it's true that you cannot give a blanket rule. Like, the amount of times that I sat there thinking, yeah, well, I could say this, and then I'm like, actually, no, I can't say that. Like, I can't. There's just no hard and fast rule when it comes to sustainable travel. It's an individualist thing. Like, take each part of the trip individually and do the best you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bea. And what are you working on at the moment, and where can people find you?
So I'm very focused on the blog at the moment, writing about different destinations and helping people explore beyond the highlights and get into the local mindset. So basically everything we've been speaking about at the moment. And then I've got a couple of tours. The one that's coming up soonest, which I think ties in the most with sustainable tourism, is Sierra Leone. And it's a country that could really benefit from tourism. It's a very challenging country to travel through. There's not the infrastructure. It's at the infancy of tourism, but it's got the opportunity to create, to learn from all of the tourism that hasn't been done properly elsewhere, and become, a staple of this is what tourism should look like. Whether that will happen or not, I don't know. But I'm organising a tour there in April, and we've still got a couple of spots left. So if anybody wants a true cultural immersion, and something that is completely beyond where most people ever travel, then Sierra Leone is the place.
I really want to go on that one. I sadly cannot afford the flights, but if you do another one, I'm coming. I really want to be able to do it. It looks, yeah, it's typical. I think I told you, off topic, but I think I told you that my friend used to live out there, and I didn't get to visit when she was there because the pandemic restrictions were really tough. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah, no. So those are kind of my two main things at the moment. No, I would love for you to join, and I know you would love it. It's not it's definitely not where you go for. It's impossible to sell like on a funky brochure. And selling it on relaxation would definitely be wrong, but it's an adventure.
Yeah, looks like a beautiful country. And where can people find you?
So my blog is which is BEA adventurous.com, and then on Instagram again I'm B, so BEA underscore adventurous underscore. And those are my two main platforms.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or you can find us on my website, which is thattravel.co.uk/the-sustainable-travel-podcast. Or you can join the Facebook group, which is just Sustainable Travel Tips Group. Thank you so much.